Good evening. Welcome to Holy Trinity, especially if you're new here, visiting for the first time. We're so happy you're here. Please come back anytime. We'd love to have you. And especially hello to those tuning in online. We're live streaming this tonight, and it will be recorded. So if you want to go back and if you forgot something or want to refer to something, it will be on our YouTube page, our Holy Trinity YouTube page. We're grateful to have Dr. Paul Camamrata here tonight. He's a graduate of Stanford University and completed his medical training at the University of Kansas School of Medicine. He completed his residency in neurosurgery and his fellowship in cerebrovascular and skull-based surgery at the University of Minnesota. He was in practice in Kansas City for 35 years, specializing in the treatment of cerebrovascular disorders, including brain aneurysms, arteriovenous malformations, brain tumors, and tumors of the skull base. Dr. Camamrata is Professor Emeritus of the Department of Neurosurgery at the University of Kansas Medical Center in Kansas City, Kansas, and he served on the board for the American Board of Neurological Surgery. Archbishop Emeritus Naumann described Dr. Camamrata as a strong defender of the Catholic faith and a supporter of the pro-life movement. Tonight, Dr. Camamrata will give a presentation on the brain as the substance through which the soul may act through the human body. Please welcome Dr. Camamrata.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Thank you very much, Jeremy. I have to stand close to the computer, I think, to get it to move. And thank you for the kind introduction. I was going over my talk with my wife tonight. She said, don't worry too much about what you're going to say. Whatever you do, don't try to come off too charming, witty, or intellectual. Just be yourself. And so, and she's with Chris Stefanik tonight. So thank you, those of you who came here. Chris Stefanik is talking a few parishes south of here, just an amazing evangelist for the faith. More of the preacher vibe I could get into. So, speaking of preachers, Larry goes to the revival, and after a while the preacher asks, anybody in need of a prayer here tonight? And anybody needs to be prayed over, come forward to the front of the altar. So Larry gets in line, and it's his turn. The preacher says, Larry, what do you want me to pray about for you? And Larry looks at him and says, Preacher, I need you to pray for my hearing. So the preacher puts his fingers in his ears and prays over him and utters some words and makes a prayer sign over the top of his head. And after a few minutes, the preacher says, so, Larry, is it any better? He goes, well, I don't know. It's not till next Wednesday. My hearing is not until next Wednesday. Anyway, and so I want to thank everybody for coming. As a neurosurgeon, I have been privileged to work on what I think is God's supreme handiwork in the human body, that is the brain. Every day I have to remind myself never to take myself too seriously working on this magnificent work. Any medical people in the house? I'm sure there are. I've met some of them. Yeah, so you'll understand some of these neurosurgery icebreaker jokes. So how do you hide a $100 bill from an orthopedic surgeon? Okay, you put it in a textbook. How do you hide a $100 bill from a radiologist? Tape it to the patient, because they never look at a patient, right? They just look at how do you hide it from an internist? Sorry, Paul. Let's see. You tape it under a dressing, okay? How do you hide it from a plastic surgeon? Trick question, you can't. And then, how do you hide it from a neurosurgeon? Tape it to his kid. How many neurosurgeons does it take to change a light bulb? One, he holds the bulb and the world spins around him. And the last one, so a patient came to me the other day and he said, Doc, there's something, got this brain worm, keeps going around in my head. I can't stop singing the green, green grass of home. And I said, well, that sounds like you've got Tom Jones syndrome. He said, is it common? I said, it's not unusual. Yeah, you got to be a certain age to remember that one. So it was Michelangelo Buonarroti who first said, dasti a me quest'anima divina e poi la imprigionasti in un corpo debole e fragile, come triste viverci dentro. You gave me this divine soul, and then you locked it in this weak and fragile body. How sad to live there within it. Perhaps he depicted this prison. This is one of his unfinished slaves, the statues that were destined for Julius II's tomb in Rome. And you can see this at, I think this one's in the Accademia in Florence, actually. And he also said, the heart is truly the house of the soul. So I would take issue with the heart, which, is just a muscle. We always kid our cardiology and cardiac surgeons. The brain is who you are. The heart's just a muscle. The kidney's a filter, these internecine medical specialist jokes. But he's only one of the countless, famous and not so famous individuals who have pondered on the seat of the soul. Where does the soul actually reside if it has a specific locus in the body? Descartes famously thought that the pineal gland was the seat of the soul. The pineal is deep, deep inside the brain. He had a pathology teacher, who once told us the kidney was the seat of the soul. I mean, mockingly, I'm sure. But I'm not a neuroscientist, I'm not a philosopher, so if anybody finds anything incorrect in what I'm presenting, please take me up on it. This will be relatively informal, so if you have questions during my presentation, ask, but I'll leave plenty of time afterwards for people to either give testimony or ask questions. So I consider myself a carpenter, a brain carpenter, with steady hands and just very, blessed with steady hands to be able to operate on God's supreme creation, and that has brought me ever closer to Him in my daily life. So I thought I'd give you a glimpse into the job of what I do, or what I did. I'm retired now as of 6 months ago. Jeremy caught me just at the tail end of my retirement, so I don't do this anymore for a living. And then we'll ponder a little bit on the immortal soul, and then we'll talk about what some say is perhaps the strongest evidence for an afterlife, and that is near-death experiences. I had the opportunity to participate in an amazing series with Chris Stefanik. Here, I've never met the guy. I was in the series with him. It was called The Search. I don't know if anybody's seen part of The Search. It's part of Pflumm Rd. You can go to the website, Pflumm Rd. Many of the parishes have this. And there was I think it's a 10-part series called The Search, mostly for young people that had fallen away from the faith, or to learn more about your faith. And I was actually in episode 2. They came and asked if they could follow me around for a day. This is a little preview of that.
My name is Paul Camamrata, and I am the chairman of the Department of Neurosurgery at the University of Kansas Medical Center. There are a number of things that you can measure about the brain: the biochemical, the physiologic, the electrical activities of the brain. During surgery, I see this a lot. I can stimulate the brain, measure a response on the finger. But is that all there is? I mean, is it just a physical reality? Can you measure your ability to imagine? Can you measure a thought? Can you measure love?
So I encourage all of you to take a look, not because of this, but it's a great, great series on the faith. And I came to this study of near-death experiences really fortuitously, or not fortuitously. So I was asked to talk to the Legatus group in Denver. Legatus is a group of Catholic businessmen and women. I don't know why I'm in it, but they asked me to talk in Denver on my job as a neurosurgeon in the seat of the soul. And about a week before my presentation, the guy called and said, "Now, make sure we really want you to talk about what you talked about in the show, near-death experiences." I said, "I didn't talk about near-death experiences. That was the guy that talked after me, so I just talked about the seat of the soul." So I had to do a deep dive into near-death experiences and found all kinds of really interesting things that I'll show you tonight. But it turns out I wasn't talking on the near-death experiences until I went to this Legatus meeting. So I saw suffering, illness, sickness, and death really daily, and its impact on individuals and families. And it would be really difficult for me, would have been difficult for me to get through this career without a deep grounding in faith. I don't know how a lot of my colleagues do it. There are a lot of secular people in medicine, a lot of belief in scientism, that there is nothing beyond the material world. And I consider myself really fortunate to have participated in what is really a corporal work of mercy every day. I go to work, I help heal people. So I'll start giving a little bit of my personal background and the great family that I had. My life's always been grounded in the lives of the saints since I was a little kid. And you know what this statue is. A friend, Pat Madrid, who's a Catholic apologist, Patrick Madrid, that you may have seen on EWTN, he had this famous quote. He goes, when he passed the statue of Our Lady of Fatima and the three visionaries, he goes, "Gosh, I love being Catholic. Not only can we worship statues, but our statues can worship statues." Yeah, so number of saints in my life since I was a kid. Let's see, I grew up in Hays, Kansas, or Hays, America, as we used to say. I know there's some Hays folks in the crowd tonight. My dad got sick. I grew up in Orange County, California, went to a military school when I was a kid. My dad got sick when I was 9. I was the oldest of 6 kids, and he probably knew he wasn't going to make it, so he moved back to Kansas, which is where my mom was from, in Ellis, out in Ellis County. My dad died on my 14th birthday. St. Francis of Assisi has been a huge companion of mine through my life. The Capuchin Franciscans were missionary evangelists, preachers, and pastors out in western Kansas. They followed the German people that had come from Russia, the Volga Germans, and so they were Franciscans. And this is a picture of Francis fresco from any of you who've been to Assisi. This is a special year for Assisi. It's the 800th year of Francis's death, so they actually brought his relics out for the first time in 800 years. But if you go there in the lower basilica, there's 2 basilicas. This is on the wall. And Cimabue is the name of the guy who did it. And it is said that this is the people who saw it said that's the best image of Francis that people have painted. So this is what he really looked like. Thomas More. I went to Thomas More Prep. I think there may even be a Thomas More Prep grad in the crowd tonight. He was a lay person, not a priest or consecrated person. So he was married with kids. Really somebody that you could relate to. Man for all seasons. I went to Stanford, as mentioned. Miraculously made it through with my faith intact. Went to KU for medical school, and then I met my bride. This is on our honeymoon in Europe, and Providence steered me to such a wonderful woman. Began my career in surgery shortly after that, and just so you get an idea of what, it's not like this anymore, but the surgical residency that I went through, for instance, you would go show up at the hospital at 5:30 in the morning, go through the whole day, spend the night in the hospital, all day the next day, go home maybe 6 or 7 p.m., and then start it all over again. So every other night on call for 3 months in a row, just brutal. And before me, it was even worse than that. So things have gotten slowly better over time, but it was pretty grueling, and my wife is really a saint, an angel to have made it through that. So she can spend the night with Chris Stefanik. That's fine. Went through residency, fellowship, had 3 kids. As my wife said, we spent 10 winters in Minnesota. That's where I trained. That's right. We were there in the snowstorm of 91, 39 inches of snow in 24 hours on Halloween. It was just brutal weather. And so I've performed, thousands, had the opportunity to be in on thousands of surgeries, people with brain tumors, spinal problems, traumatic injuries, aneurysms, things like that. And I can't tell you how emotional or moving it is, to see for the first time in someone asleep and their skull open to see the brain pulsating there and rising and falling with each breath. And then to have that same human being wake up, a couple of hours later, normal. It's like, wait a minute, I saw your brain 2 hours ago. This is the organ that houses consciousness and through which the soul expresses itself. So, but many times during these surgeries, I've been intensely aware that somewhere lays the consciousness of this person and their soul that I have to try to maintain at all costs. So briefly, how we do surgery on the brain, you go to sleep with your anesthesia, so hopefully you're not going to feel anything after that. The head area is prepped out and covered, so there's little personalization is kind of out of it in most cases. You open the skin, you have a drill, just a Black & Decker. That's not a Black & Decker, but it's you take the skull off through some little holes in a jigsaw. You open the covering of the brain. The brain's enclosed in this thing called the dura mater, Latin for hard mother, and it's a sac that encloses the brain and the spinal cord. You open that up, and then you see the brain in front of you. So this is a young man a number of years ago who was having epilepsy. So epilepsy is seizures, multiple seizures that can happen anytime, day or night. He couldn't hold a job, couldn't drive a car. I think he was about 18 or 19 years old at the time. And we were able to determine, after placing electrodes down into the brain, that little area there in yellow was the abnormal area. It was hard to see on a regular MRI, so it was just determined by these little electrodes that we put in. And I'll just go through a little bit of his surgery. So this is the, let's see here. Yeah, so this is the surface of the brain. If you're a little squeamish, there won't be a whole lot of blood here. I'm looking through an operating microscope, and that little round instrument is a knife. That little gold-tipped instrument is a cautery, so it heats up the blood vessels so that I can cut the blood vessels. There's a tiny little scissors. So just to give you an idea, that red blood vessel right in the middle there that I'm working on is about 2 millimeters in diameter. Pretty small. And there's a suction there in my left hand and a little cotton that I keep there to soak up the spinal fluid and any blood that might occur. So this lesion that you saw in that picture is deep in the brain, like 3 or 4 centimeters down. So it's not on the surface. So I'm trying to divide the gyri of the brain, the little gyri. They're the formations on the surface of the brain that are squished together. So you can split them very gently and go deep into the brain. And then we have this sort of GPS system that tells where we are. So the microscope is focused in the brain, and then that little yellow thing shows up because I have circled that on the scan beforehand, and the computer system maps it. It's kind of like the fighter pilots when they're going in and they can't see, and then it says, shoot here, here's the target. This is the thing we're aiming for, is that yellowish thing there. It looks just like the brain around it. So for whatever reason, there's some scar tissue in there, and it's causing misfiring in the brain. The brain works on electricity, and that misfiring is causing this young man to have epilepsy. So we take this little grid of electrodes. You see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's little metal electrodes on there, platinum, that is sitting on the surface of the brain, and then our colleagues in the corner of the operating room are looking at their machine, and they're saying, oh yeah, there's a whole bunch of spikes under number 2 and number 3. So we pull that out, go suck out number 2 and number 3 in the brain, provided that this is tissue that they don't need. In other words, it's not running their arm or leg. There's various ways. I'll show you how we figure that out. So there, it's like, well, the work's cut out for me. There's a knife. That's a scalpel. You can see it right there cutting into the brain. And that yellow area is going to be removed. And after it's removed, it's sent to the pathologist. And they look at it and say, yeah, there's some scar tissue in there. We saw scar tissue. You got the right stuff. And here it is. The suction is being used to remove some of that. And anyway, eventually, let's see if we can get to the end here. So this is showing me, the suction is the blue thing. So I was holding the suction and it was showing where I am on the scan. So the scan beams up into my eye and I can see I'm right inside the thing. So, and then at the very end, we just pull out, when we stick that little electrode thing in there again, and they say it's silent. There's no popping. And so then we lay this metal sort of mesh stuff in there, which is a coagulant, keeps it from bleeding, and doesn't even look like we've been in there, in that tiny little hole. So, and the young man woke up, went home, and I think he's now about 7 or 8 years seizure-free. So he's got a driver's license, he's working. It's really amazing what we're able to do now with the help of all of these adjuncts in surgery. So this is the brain. These are the nervous connections of the brain. 80 to 90 billion cells in the adult human brain, and 1,000 to 10,000 more connections than that. This is the seat of everything that we are, where our sensations are, where our movements come from, where our thoughts come from. But we can't sense what is in the brain in the strict sense of, you sense when someone touches you. There are no pain or touch sensations inside the brain, and that allows us to be able to operate on the brain when somebody's awake. You can't do knee surgery with somebody awake because it hurts. But in the brain, you can be awake because there's no pain fibers inside there. So we can actually do surgery in the brain with someone awake. So let's see. Death. Yes, that is correct. The next slide. How's that for a change of topic? Well, we know what death is, or at least we think we know what death is, the permanent cessation of all vital functions. And in ancient times, it's really the disintegration of the organism, right? So the soul has left the body. The animating property has left the body. And the only way in the past you were ever able to tell that was rigor mortis, right? You don't know if this person who just heart stopped beating 5 minutes ago is still dead. But if you walk up and somebody's got rigor mortis, it's clear that they have died. And so when does that actually happen? I'll show you some evidence at the end of the talk here that we are reevaluating a lot of that from the basis of science over the last several years. And it has some significant implications to end-of-life issues, organ transplantation, etc. So when someone dies, we declare them dead. I have declared hundreds and hundreds of people brain dead. You've heard the concept of brain death, which is believed to be the irreversible loss of all brain function, including the brainstem. And before we declare someone brain dead, we wait oftentimes 24 hours, if possible, to make sure that what we see at one time is good 24 hours later. There's all kinds of confirmatory tests that we do, etc. But even with that, you have read about cases where brain death was prematurely declared on some people. So we're animated by a soul. Where is that soul? Does the soul live in a certain location? Where does it go after death? What is the evidence for the immortal soul? So as materialists say, the soul and the mind are simply the result of neuronal impulses. They give rise to the mind. Does it die when the brain dies? These are all questions that you've heard. What is the evidence that the mind or the soul is anything other than the physical activity of neurons? Is our soul immortal and live on after us? As some say, is that the only way we live, or the only way we live on is through our accomplishments? Woody Allen used to say, he famously quipped, "I don't want to achieve immortality through my work, I want to achieve it through not dying." I don't want to live on in the hearts of my countrymen, I'd rather live on in my apartment. It's like the three Irish guys at the wake, Sean, O'Callahan has died. Mickey, Patty, and Liam are there, to pay their respects to Sean. Mickey says to Patty and Liam, he says, guys, what would you like the people to say about you when you've passed on? And Patty says, well, I'd like them to say Patty was a family man. He took care of his family, the best man, best provider a family could ask for. Liam, what would you like them to say about you? And he goes, I'd like them to say Liam was a God-fearing man. He attended Mass and was gave to the church and the poor, a saint of a man. Mickey says, I'd like them to look down at me and say, look, he's moving. So Carl Sagan, you remember Carl Sagan? He was a materialist in his philosophy, and he said, my fundamental premise about the brain is that what we sometimes call the mind, it's all just a consequence of its anatomy and physiology and nothing more. But there are things about the mind that materialists cannot explain, at least to my satisfaction and to many others. So the placebo effect. When you have a sham surgery, or when you do surgery and don't do anything, and the patients wake up cured. We don't do sham surgery, but the people, you don't find anything at the time of surgery, and someone wakes up and they have somehow healed themselves. Neuroimaging evidence that subjects can regulate their emotions by thinking about them. So we now have ways of looking at the live brain that tell us when we're thinking what parts of the brain are activated, and we can then tell the person, well, think of something different, or don't be as excited as you are when you see that picture, and you can modulate that. So how does that happen if somehow your mind is telling your brain to work differently? There's the nocebo effect that I don't think I mentioned that here, but yeah, the nocebo effect, which is people that come in and tell you that they don't want to have the surgery because they think they're going to die, and then they do. We've known as surgeons, if somebody comes in and says, I've really got a bad feeling about surgery today, doc, we don't operate. Do it the next day, etc., because there are these consequences that the mind is having over the body. And then there's the apparent ability of some humans to consistently score above chance in controlled studies of mental effects on remote objects, or telepathy. And lastly, there are the near-death experiences. The brain dies, but does the soul or the mind go with it? So in this really important book that came out a number of years ago, Dinesh D'Souza, a former Catholic author, wrote about life after death, the evidence. And he says that the belief in an afterlife in religions is almost universal. Every religion, almost every religion believes in some form of the afterlife. And certainly the three Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, believe in the soul, the immortality of the soul. The body perishes, the soul lives on. Death used to be a part of our lives. It's not so much anymore. Almost everybody dies in a hospital. 100 years, 150 years ago, really, wasn't the case. The funeral processions, we don't see a lot of those anymore. Certainly, used to be the body was on display. There was a good deal of wailing, and the banshee in Ireland that would go before the funeral cortege and help people get their grief out. How many here have actually been with someone at the moment of death? A fair number of people, yeah, but we're an older crowd. So the young people, when you have a funeral, people don't carry the coffin anymore. There's something organic about carrying the weight of a dead body. They put it on rollers. I know it's lawyers probably get into the act. People hurt themselves by carrying the coffin, but you just don't see that anymore. They roll it out of the church. Grief is largely private. There's no large displays of grief anymore. Materialism really has a stranglehold, I think, on our modern day society. So the mind and the soul are often spoken of in the same context, as if one is the other. But I think in truth they point to two different dimensions of who we are. The mind is the seat of thought, understanding, logic, imagination, and it's the way our inner life is conscious of itself. The soul, on the other hand, is something deeper. And if you read the ancient Greeks, it's not merely what we think with, but a part of who we are. The soul and the body is who we are together, the spark that animates the body, as Aristotle would say. So, simpler way to say it would be the mind is the voice of the soul. How the soul thinks and reasons. The soul is the life behind the voice, what makes us living, personable. Or you could say the soul is the music, the animating essence. The mind is the musician that controls the conscious agent that interprets the music, and the brain is the instrument that gets it out. So by the end of the 5th century before Christ, the question of whether the heart or the brain was the seat of intelligence remained unresolved. And that changed with the work of the ancient Greek physician Hippocrates. We all take a Hippocratic oath. Hippocrates said, "Men ought to know that from the brain and the brain alone arise our pleasures, joys, laughter, and jests, our sorrows, pains, grief, and tears. Through it, in particular, we think, see, hear, and distinguish the ugly from the beautiful, the bad from the good, the pleasant from the unpleasant. I hold that the brain is the most powerful organ of the body, wherefore I assert that the brain is the interpreter of consciousness." That was Hippocrates in 400 BC. Socrates argued that the bodies are mortal, made of perishable materials, and the souls are not subject to those constraints. Aristotle contended that the soul was the essence of our being, but he disagreed with Plato that the soul was immortal. Aquinas continued the Aristotelian thinking in the Middle Ages. The soul was the vital principle that enabled human beings to know, to move, and to love. So a number of philosophers thought that the brain was the seat of the soul. Leonardo da Vinci, these are diagrams from his sketchings of human anatomy, his sketching on cadavers. He thought that the brain was actually near the visual structures. The soul was over the optic chiasm. Descartes, I mentioned earlier, thought it was in the pineal gland, which is back quite a ways, kind of halfway between the eyes and the back of the head. Others placed the soul in the brainstem. So the British neurophysiologist Charles Sherrington he studied the nervous system of animals and higher primates all of his life. He acknowledged that there were problems encountered in trying to restrict the mind to the workings of the brain. He was well aware that, quote, "our mental experience is not open to observation through any sense organ. The brain is the provider of the mind. The mental action lies somewhere buried in the brain." And then there was a Catholic, a Nobel Prize winner, a guy named John Eccles, Sir John Eccles from Australia, also a neurophysiologist. Although he accepted Darwinian evolution, he argued that there is a divine providence operating over and above the materialist happenings of biological evolution. He was a very brilliant man and a scientist, very well-respected scientist, who came up with this. Dr. Duncan McDougall was the guy who tried to weigh the soul. Okay, so weigh the soul, how does that? So he took 6 people in the act of dying. You could never do this today, thank God. This is probably 120 years ago. At the moment of death, my first subject was a man dying of tuberculosis, and he had them on a scale. And the death occurred with little or no muscular movement. The beam could be kept more perfectly at balance. The patient was under observation for 3 hours and 40 minutes before dying, and he said that he lost weight slowly at the rate of 1 ounce per hour. The loss was ascertained to be 3/4 of an ounce. So he published an article saying the soul weighed 3/4 of an ounce, because in these 6 people I averaged it together, etc. Well, what kind of evidence is there that the soul lives on after us? So most people say that near-death experiences are that answer. I shouldn't say most people. Many people say that near-death experiences could be that evidence. I'm going to call them NDEs from this time. So they all seem to have a very similar composition, right? Person is pronounced dead by a doctor or has been dead for a while. Hears a loud noise, moves through a tunnel, sees a light at the end of the tunnel. They're outside the body. They can see things from outside the body. Often encounter spirits of relatives who are long dead. Some report Jesus or another deity, if you're not Christian. People often say they've seen their whole life pass before them, like what we would consider the particular judgment in Catholicism. Then somehow they approach a barrier. It's decided it's not their time yet. They come back somehow and cannot express fully the sentiment that they had, the beauty they saw, the light, etc. Thousands of descriptions of this. And let's look at some famous people now that have had NDEs. So Plato reports in the Republic, so this is written 380 BC, a soldier named when the bodies of those who died in the battle were collected 10 days after his death, Ur's body remained undecomposed. So here's the first clue, no rigor mortis. So soul is still in there. 2 days later, he revives on his funeral pyre and then tells others of his journey in the afterlife, including an account of meeting other spirits, being in a tunnel, the idea that moral people are rewarded and immoral people are punished after death. He was told he would not be judged and returned. Okay, in the year 600, that's Ernest Hemingway, he's later, but 600, Bede, the Venerable Bede, who was a priest in Great Britain, describes a similar episode among one of his Benedictine monks. Ernest Hemingway, wounded by shrapnel in World War I, lying in a hospital bed in Italy, he wrote to a friend that on a fateful night in 1918, a huge bomb exploded. He says, I died then. I felt my soul or something coming right out of my body, like you'd pull a silk handkerchief out of a pocket by one corner. It flew around and came back and went in again, and I was not dead anymore. This Hemingway was hit by shrapnel. And he said he was transformed by the experience and wrote a farewell to arms after that. Following a heart attack, Carl Jung in 1944, noted psychologist and author, had a near-death experience. He felt himself coming out of his body, and he saw the earth from a vantage point of about 1,000 miles above it. He said, here is what I saw. My field of vision did not include the whole earth, but it was, let's see if I could show this video again. He said, its global shape was plainly distinguishable. Its outline shone with a silvery gleam through that wonderful blue light. He was in a hospital and in a coma at the time. He described this afterwards. In many places, the globe seemed colored or spotted dark green like oxidized silver. Far away to the left lay a broad expanse, the reddish-yellow desert of Arabia. It was though the silver of the earth had there assumed a reddish-gold hue. Back came the Red Sea, and as far, far back, I could just make out a bit of the Mediterranean. Later, I discovered how high in space you would have to be to see this, approximately 1,000 miles. The sight of the earth from this height was the most glorious thing I had ever seen. 3 weeks were to pass before I could truly make up my mind to live again after he was healed. So again, in 1944, nobody could see this. So those with NDEs point often to perhaps the most fascinating aspect, and those are things called veridical facts. So verifiable facts, things that are true that they saw during their NDE. So thousands and thousands of people described NDEs. Hundreds and hundreds of people have described these veridical experiences. They often have detailed accounts of what happened while they were dead. So these are things that can be corroborated, unusual things, but can be corroborated by people who were there, not part of the ordinary resuscitation processes. And many of these have been described by a guy named von Limmel, Pim von Lommel is his name, sorry. He's a cardiologist, you'll see him here in a moment. And he's interviewed on YouTube a number of times, a brilliant cardiologist from the Netherlands. And I'm gonna recite 10 of them to you, or recount 10 of them that he recounts in his book. So case 1, a nurse. This was a nurse who, during a night shift, an ambulance brings in a 44-year-old cyanotic guy who was I think a motorcycle accident victim. He was comatose, comes into the coronary care unit. He had been found about an hour before by passerbys on a road. He gets artificial respiration without intubation, heart massage, defibrillation are applied. So they're pumping the guy, doing CPR on him for, I think it was over an hour and a half. The nurse says, went to intubate the patient, I removed the upper dentures, put him on the crash cart. We continued CPR for an hour and a half until finally the patient had sufficient heart rhythm, blood pressure, still comatose for a week. And the guy wakes up in the ICU a week later, and the moment he sees the nurse, he says, "Oh, that nurse knows where my dentures are." And she's very surprised. He says, "Yeah, you were there when I was brought into the hospital. You took the dentures out of my mouth, put them in this slide-out drawer in a cart, and that's where you put my teeth." And they went and found them exactly there. She says, "I was especially amazed because I remember this happening while the guy was in deep coma during the process of CPR. When I asked further, it appeared that he had seen himself lying in the bed and perceived from above how busy the nurses and doctors had been during CPR. He was also able to correctly describe and in detail the small room in which he had been resuscitated, the appearance of those presents, like myself. At the time he observed the situation, had been very much afraid that they would stop CPR and that he would die. And it's true, we had been very negative about this man's prognosis due to his very poor medical condition. Patient tells me he desperately and unsuccessfully tried to make it clear that he was still alive and we should keep going with the CPR. He's deeply impressed by his experience, says he's no longer afraid of death. So this is many people who've had these NDEs, they come back and say they're no longer afraid of dying, and they have sometimes the ability to predict things in the future. Professor Van Lommel has written about this. Case 2, elderly woman who suffered a cardiac arrest during her stay in the hospital, where this man was the chief of psychiatry. She was unconscious. The resuscitation team tried to revive her. According to her later report, she floated out of her body, stood near the window, watching the resuscitation. She observed without any pain whatsoever as they thumped on her chest, pumped air into her lungs. During the resuscitation, a pen fell out of her doctor's pocket and rolled near the same window where her out-of-body spirit was standing and watching. The doctor eventually walked over, picked up the pen, put it in his pocket, and then he rejoined the frantic effort to save her. They succeeded. A few days later, she told her doctor she had observed the resuscitation team at work during her cardiac arrest. "No," he said, "it's more than likely, neurons that were hypoxic during your recovery. Don't worry, you were probably hallucinating. This happens sometimes when the heart stops beating." And she says, "But I saw your pen roll over to the window." And she describes the pen and all the other details of the resuscitation. The doctor was, white, couldn't believe it. But his patient had not only been comatose, but she had been blind for many years. So she couldn't see. The cardiologist was still shaken days later when he told the psychiatrist about it. He confirmed that everything the woman had related had indeed took place and that her descriptions were accurate. So this is another thing blind people often see in their near-death experiences. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross gave detailed descriptions of people undergoing medical procedures, identifying jewelry, colors of clothing of people around them when they had these NDEs, even though they had been blind from birth. Indeed, 80% of people born blind who have had NDEs can see in their near-death experiences. Some of them actually described what had gone on when their soul left their body, shape, colors of things in the rooms, etc. Another case, a Seattle woman who had a near-death experience after an MI was taken to the emergency room. They did CPR on her body for an hour on her. She told the social worker that her soul separated from the body, seemed to fly above the emergency room outside the hospital, and she was distracted by the presence of a shoe on the third floor ledge of the hospital building at the north end of the ER. She said it was a tennis shoe, it was untied, the lace was stuck under the heel. The social worker thought, this lady's nuts. She was brought to the ER at night. She couldn't see anything outside, so she climbed outside the third floor ledge, found the exact tennis shoe, exactly as she had described it, with the lace under the heel. Another case of Professor von Lommels. This is a 6-year-old girl describing her resuscitation. 6-year-olds don't know what goes on in an ER or an OR. It's pretty amazing that a 6-year-old did that. So this is Professor von Lommel himself talking about one case where relatives, dead relatives, had been encountered.
And then if deceased acquaintances of relatives are encountered and seen in another worldly dimension, they are usually recognized by their appearance, and communication is possible through thought transfer. Quote, during my cardiac arrest, I had an extensive experience, and later I saw, apart from my deceased grandmother, a man who looked at me lovingly, but whom I did not know. More than 10 years later, at my mother's deathbed, she confessed to me that I had been born out of an extramarital relationship, my father being a Jewish man who had been deported and killed during the Second World War. And my mother showed me his picture. The unknown man that I had seen more than 10 years before during my NDE turned out to be my biological father.
Another case, a near-death experience survivor who had a severe case of encephalitis and lost consciousness. Upon recovery, drew a sketch of a girl that she had encountered during her coma. She told her parents what she was drawing. They became ashen and left the room. They later returned and told her about the sister she never knew she had, who was struck by a car and died long before she was born. And this looked strikingly like her sister. Case number 8, an adult whose NDE had occurred in childhood reported that while in the light, he became aware that there were some presences there, some ladies in the light. I didn't know them at the time, he said. They were so loving and wonderful, I didn't want to come back. I didn't see any pictures of them until I was an adult. And then I said, oh yeah, they were my great-grandmothers who had died years before I was born. As I mentioned before, many people experience a life review, something like a particular judgment that happens virtually instantaneously, that we in Catholicism would call particular judgment, a review of one's life events. So this case number 9 was a man in a near-death experience in a car accident who describes all the features of the accident. He had the feeling, again, this is quoting from Professor von Lommel, he had the feeling of moving up through a dark tunnel. A being filled with love and light appeared to him. Now he had a second life review, one guided by the being of light. He felt bathed in love and compassion, reviewed the moral choices he had made in his lifetime. He suddenly understood he was part of an important part of the universe and that his life had a purpose. But the veridical experiences here were the description of the accident. And then there's the last one, the description of an NDE, which you can read about. I think her name was Pam Reynolds. There's many YouTube videos about it. And it's a woman who underwent a procedure that we used to perform in neurosurgery called circulatory arrest. So she had a giant aneurysm deep in the brain, near the brainstem. And back in the day, when I was young, the only way that you could approach these, because they were large and filled with blood with every beat of the heart, is to literally drain all the blood out of the body and cool the body down to, 50 degrees. It was, it's like when you go into a pond so you have circulatory arrest. This is what we would do. We'd cool the body down, gradually drain all the blood out, so you're dead. There's no blood going to the brain for upwards of 45 minutes to an hour. They stopped doing the procedure because 10% of the people died. And now the clipping of the aneurysm itself was very risky, and so that's why we took the risk of doing this procedure. But this woman, Pam Reynolds, described everything that went on during her procedure when her EEG, a test that measures brain waves, was flat, when there's no blood circulating through her body. She says, the first thing I heard was the drill sound. It was a D natural. She was a musician, so she knew the speed of the drill was a D. I felt it was pulling me out of the top of my head. The further out of my body I got, the more clear the tone became. I was metaphorically sitting on Dr. Spetzler's shoulder. Dr. Spetzler was the guy who's done more of these than anybody in Phoenix. It was It was not like normal vision. It was brighter and more focused. There was so much in the operating room I didn't recognize. So many people, which is true for these procedures. We would have 20 people in the room, 25 people. I expected them to take all of the hair, but they did not. The saw thing that I hated the sound of looked like an electric toothbrush with a dent in it. So she's describing all of the instruments. I heard the saw crank up. A female cardiac surgeon located the femoral artery and vein in my right groin. They turned out to be too small to handle the large flow of blood needed for the bypass machine, so they used the left side. Again, she had no way of knowing this. Nobody told her that, but she wrote all this down afterwards. 20 minutes later, her core body temperature had fallen to 60 degrees. This is when we can actually drain the blood out. We're doing clicking in the ears the whole time, which is seeing if she can hear things, and then monitoring the waves in the brain. That was all flat, so there was no electrical activity. Anyway, then they went ahead, clipped the aneurysm. She describes the blood being drained out of her like they were draining blood from a car, she thought. Anyway, she said, my uncle, so she met her uncle. She said the light was incredibly bright, like sitting in the middle of a light bulb. My uncle said he would take me back. Everything was fine. I didn't want to go. Then I got to the end of it, saw the thing, my body. I didn't want to get into it. It looked terrible, like a train wreck. When I came back, they were playing Hotel California. And the line, you can check out anytime you want, but you could never leave. So she mentioned it later to her surgeon, said that was very insensitive to be playing that song during closing my thing. So, you know, those are just 10 of the many, many examples that this cardiologist has had through all of the people that have had cardiac arrest that survived. And this is a very small number, and I'll show you at the very end of the talk how small the number is, the people that make it through a full cardiac arrest. And then of that, 5% of people that make it, the ones that have a near-death experience during that is relatively small. So materialists would say that, your joys, your sorrows. This is a guy who discovered DNA, Watson and Crick. Your joys, your sorrows, your memories, your ambition, personal identity, no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. But D'Souza claims that our minds simply cannot be accounted for in terms of our neurons alone. Several prominent neuroscientists, among other philosophers, believe in the concept of dualism, a body and a spirit, and we're sort of the hybrid of the two. You've heard the quote from C.S. Lewis, you don't have a soul, you are a soul, you have a body. That's not, he never did say that, actually. It's borders on a Gnostic heresy. But we are, at least in our faith, we believe that we are, when you say we are, our nature is both soul and body. Now, there was a neurosurgeon that preceded me by probably 70, 80 years, named Wilder Penfield. And Penfield is how we know much about what parts of the brain do what, because he operated on hundreds and hundreds of people awake on their brain. I was able to do that as well as all of my trainees here. He operated over 1,000 patients and operated in the brain hundreds of thousands of times, and he would find memories, long hidden memories, simply by stimulating the brain in these awake folks. Here's a video of his from a few years ago.
The operations are carried out under local anesthesia so that the patient is conscious and can talk. He does not feel anything when the electrode touches the brain with its gentle electrical current. It is as though the electrode touched a wire recorder or a strip of film, and he relives a period of time. When I talked to them afterwards about how it seemed to them, they say it is much more real than any remembering. It is as though they were re-experiencing it. I believe you're about to hear the actual words of patients in response to this stimulus, which they were quite unaware of while they were in the operating room. You will hear them as I heard them.
I have a sudden feeling as though I lived through all this before.
So deja vu.
Now I see them. They're laughing, my friends. And I'm with them in a house in South Africa. They are my old friends.
I hear children's voices. I hear them down on the river. I'm sitting in a railroad station in a small town.
So here's one of those patients after surgery Penfield talked to, where he stimulated a part of the brain, and every time he hit it, a song would play. And this woman was able to remember and repeat the song. And then he would go to other parts of the brain, and then without letting her know, go back to that same area, and she'd, oh, there it is again. So clearly these memories are encoded.
This is the
specific
brain.
structures.
Now, when we stimulated at 3, you had a tingling in your thumb. You've probably forgotten.
Not very clear.
Then underneath this, we stimulated, and to my astonishment, you said, I hear music. Then I repeated it without warning you a little while later. You said, I hear that music again. Tell us what you heard.
Well, I heard what sounded like an orchestra playing, and I asked the nurse where it was coming from, and she asked me the name of it. But I said, I know the song, but I can't think of the name of it. And
Then I stimulated it again, you remember, and asked you about it, and you hummed it. Will you hum it now? You remember it.
yes.
Go ahead.
Da 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 da.
Yes, and then when you got to that point, the nurse exclaimed, I know what it is. It's rolling along together. You said what?
And I said, yes, that's what it is.
Yeah, so these are the kinds of things that we can do now during surgery to locate where speech is, for instance, that we don't want to harm, where the movement of a part of the body is. This was a sign I had that many of you who are domers would recognize in my operating room. This is actually a patient who is awake. That's the brain there. The patient's awake under the drapes, and we have her picture up on a large screen. So there's a camera under the drapes that's showing her as we ask her to say certain things while we're stimulating the brain. So we can see if her face is moving properly, and then she can talk to us. And if her speech gets garbled, then I know, uh-oh, we're encroaching on a very important area. We gotta stay back. We put these little grids on, as you saw earlier, to measure. Again, we can stimulate between some of those numbers, and the person in the corner of the room will tell us that that's the leg area or the hand area. We don't want to harm that. Penfield did not believe that the substance of the brain accounted for all of the mind. Why was he this dualist? Well, he said a few things. Number one, all the stimulations were concrete things, like they would stutter or quit talking. So we will have people, recite the Our Father or say A, B, C, D, and then when we stimulate, they go A, B, C, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, that's the speech area, So, but never once during stimulation did he get an abstract thought. A person wouldn't say, oh, I've just, felt a surge of a certain emotion or a different abstract thought. Number two, no intellectual seizures. In other words, we can create a seizure of an arm twitching from electric, but we can't create intellectual seizures. And then, again, when asking them to move their arm, Penfield noted that they always retained a sense of agency. They knew that I was making the arm move, not that they were moving the arm. They could say, oh yeah, my arm is moving, but you're making it move. I'm not doing it. Here's an example from one of my cases. Gentleman, we were operating right near his lips and his tongue. We didn't want to hurt his speech, so you'll see his tongue. Every once in a while, you'll hear a little buzzing sound in the background, and his tongue will jut to the opposite side. I'm on the other side of the drape, operating on his brain right above that blue sheet. There he's sticking his tongue out. And then you see the tongue goes to the right side. He didn't do that. We did it with the stimulator on the surface of his brain. And in fact, at one point in time, you hear me ask him, are you doing that or am I doing that? No, you're doing that. Not feeling anything there? Nope, nothing there. And you'll see it move again here. The tumor was right next to his mouth area, so didn't want him to wake up with a mush mouth. So.
No, not that last two.
The head is fixed. There, his tongue stuck out. Yeah, you did that, he said again. So, I'll leave you now with some interesting thoughts. In dualism, the problem is, how does the mind act on a body? If the mind is an immaterial substance and the body is material. D'Souza said, well, minds are like spirits, and spirits go through walls, they don't push walls. So you have to, the nature of a soul is not such that it interacts necessarily with material things. Scientists will say that it's impossible to study the soul, at least with our current measures, but our current measures are looking at, strict material, physical things. And, while deterioration of the brain might impede the operation of the mind, if the two are separate, it makes it possible that our mind, our immaterial mind, our soul, might survive the termination of our physical frames. So, two features of the mind, according to D'Souza, specifically consciousness and free will, are attributes of the human soul that seem to operate outside of the laws of physical nature and are not subject to laws governing the mortality of the body, so therefore the soul could live on. And this just came out literally earlier this month. I really wanted to show this to you. From a very important meeting in Phoenix a couple of weeks ago, a student at Arizona State University put together a number of articles, looked at a number of articles and made these rather shocking statements. Biological and neural functions do not cease abruptly, but rather taper off over minutes. That elements of consciousness may briefly exist beyond the measurable signals we typically rely on. And she showed evidence in studies that perhaps the brain continues to work during the dying process. She described it as, we have stage 1, 2, and 3 cancer. We should now look at death as stage 1 of death, stage 2 of death, stage 3 of death. In other words, you might not be dead 30 seconds after there's no blood to your brain, that the brain has a way of sort of easing us out of this life. Consciousness may not vanish the moment the brain falls silent, she said. Cells may not die the moment the heart stops. This research proposes that death does not extinguish life suddenly, but instead begins a transformation, one that medicine, philosophy, and ethics must now approach with deeper humility and renewed clarity. Person who was also there and who has conducted 2 rather large multi-center studies called AWARE, the AWARE studies, is Sam Parnia. He's a director of the Critical Care and Resuscitation Unit at NYU. Nobody's been able to show how brain cells which produce proteins can generate something so different, thoughts or consciousness. Interestingly, there's never been a plausible biological mechanism. Your mind, your consciousness, your psyche, the thing that makes you you, may not be produced by the brain. The brain may be acting more like an intermediary. And he actually has said some rather frightening things, that the last thing that a patient may hear in the hospital after a failed arrest is time of death 8:10. In other words, you might be alive when you're being declared dead because consciousness may persist. Even though you're not able to show it in the body, there is evidence that these brain waves go on for minutes, sometimes hours after death. To give you an idea of how rare this is, it was really hard to see the small print here, but I can tell you, this was an attempt at a prospective look at near-death experiences. In other words, they took people, they have to get people that have a cardiac arrest. And then you have to survive the cardiac arrest. And then after that, you have to have been one of the few that have had a near-death experience. So you can see here, he started with 567 patients. They, quote, recruited. Those are the people who died, who arrested. They got 213 of them back for longer than 30 minutes, so 37% of that. Only 53 of those 213 survived to get out of the hospital. So you're now talking about 5% of the big number. And then it says in-hospital interview completed. That was only 28, so 52% of the survivors. And then subjects with memories and or perceptions, only 11. And then there were 17 without. So out of 567 people that arrested, 11 people had survived and had some memories of a near-death experience. So what they tried to do is when somebody arrested, they would, everybody's beeper would go off on the team. They would all rush down to the place where the person arrested, put some headphones on, mention words to them and clicking in the ears, show them pictures on a computer in front of them so that and then they went back afterwards and asked the people that made it, the very few people that made it and that said that they had some sort of an experience. And I think there were 2 of these people that had perceptions that were veridical. In other words, they could verify that they saw. Really, there was another study done where they would put things above in the rooms, in the ERs, in the critical care units, in the surgery suites, and in the hopes that somebody would die in there and then be resuscitated and then be able to tell them that they saw the teddy bear up in the corner of the room that they put there, et cetera. So it's a very, very complex thing to study. So we come back to the question of the brain. Is it really the seat of the soul temporarily during our sojourn on earth, or the seat of the mind, the voice, as it were, of the soul? Well, Michelangelo, who we started off looking at, as you recall, posited the seat of the soul as the heart. Well, he seems to have given some thought to this issue as well. He was known to be an expert in human anatomy and cadaveric dissection, and you can see that he has concealed a very accurate picture of the human brain in God's cape in the famous creation of Adam on the Sistine Chapel. You can see how very similar it is to a sagittal section of the brain. This was discovered by a psychiatrist about 50 years ago. He published this in a very reputable journal. So I think truly that Michelangelo was trying to tell us something. This is typically called the creation of Adam, but Adam's eyes are open and the fingers aren't touching yet. So, could he be giving Adam free will? Could he be ensouling Adam at that point in time, giving him wisdom? We can postulate on that. John Eccles, who I told you about earlier, the Australian neurophysiologist, and I'll close with this, said, "I cannot believe that this wonderful gift of a conscious existence has no further futures." This is a very eminent scientist. No possibility of another existence under some other unimaginable conditions. I can't believe that that would be the case. We may look at the death of the body and the brain as the dissolution of our dualistic existence. We hope that the new liberated soul will find a new future of more profound importance and with a more delightful experience of a renewed bodily existence in keeping with traditional Christian teaching. So I leave you with this hypothesis: the human brain is the pinnacle of God's creation and at least temporarily subsumes the locus of the expression or the voice of the soul. And as such, we must care for the substance, the body and the brain, and especially care for the soul. Thank you. Can we take some questions? Or?
Yes, we're open for questions. Just raise your hand and give me a chance to get to you. I'll let you ask your question in the microphone so everyone can hear it, and then the good doctor will answer. And just one quick note, if any of this was hard to hear, we did record it all with a direct audio feed, so if you go to our YouTube page, you'll be able to turn it up as loud as you want and hear it as good as you want. And so I apologize for our sound system today. So, question?
In the state of Kansas, it requires 2 physicians to declare you dead, or if they declare you dead, they're dead. And you don't have to be dead or by your recording. They have to just state if you've had a CNS problem, one doctor says, well, he's going to die, and the other, I agree.
Yeah, it's very difficult. So, I've declared hundreds of people brain dead, fulfilling very, very strict criteria. There are no neurologic responses for days on end. We do a whole bunch of other tests to study the brain, activity in the brain, etc. nevertheless, there was a New York Times article came out about 6 months ago that showed, I think there's a family in Tennessee, Nashville, whatever. They're people like on their way to have their heart taken out, and they woke up, and the surgeon refused to take part in it. I mean, I think there is a significant. I think we need to take a pause in, the declaration of brain death. For the good of all of us, we have to be absolutely 100% certain. There are some crazy things being done. Now, organ transplantation is an extremely virtuous thing, and there are many people, perhaps there are people here that have been alive only because of the donation of the amazing gift of life. But we can't take a life to do that. And not that we think we're taking lives, but I think there's enough doubt that has crept in over the last few years to the process. There are right now there was a young woman a number of years ago named Jai McMath, who was I think she was 13 or 14 when she had a tonsillectomy gone bad. Blood pressure dropped, resuscitated, had profound brain injury, and was declared brain dead by several very reputable neurologists in her hospital. Her family refused to agree with that, and they got lawyers involved. They eventually transferred her to another hospital on the East Coast. She survived. Lived another probably 7 or 8 years. I'm probably mistaken there. Went through puberty. It's like, well, wait a minute. She went through puberty. That part of the brain is still working, the hormonal secretions in the hypothalamus. And so her family, and there's video of her that show that she appears to be having some stimulus, some reaction to stimulus in the environment. So obviously that case is difficult to swallow. We're having a talk. The Catholic Medical Association here locally is sponsoring a talk in a few weeks. I'm going to ask if I could put some brochures in the back of church on brain death, and the moral uncertainty of brain death is the title of the talk.
It seems like science and faith have been in a zero-sum game. What science has gained, faith has lost. Are we nearing an inflection point where points can be scored by both, that advances of science could actually grow the element of faith so it's no longer a zero-sum game?
I think so. I mean, this last talk a couple weeks ago at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, a very reputable organization. There were, esteemed scientists discussing, they didn't really use the word soul, but what happens after death, that consciousness can continue in a different form. So I would say, yeah, I think for me, the more I delve into this, the closer it brings me to Christ and my belief in the truths of our faith. And there are a lot of people like that.
You hear a lot of times about you have someone in the hospital who's in a coma, and they always say, talk to them, talk to them. And you don't know whether they're going to actually hear you or understand or know what you're saying. But of course, a lot of that is for yourself. But have you had patients that have woken up after a deep coma and remembered conversations that people had, or?
I don't care how impaired the person is, how deep the coma is, what medicine they're in. If I'm talking to the family about end-of-life issues or something very serious, I say, let's walk out of the room, talk to them as if they may be hearing everything. So I don't like to talk in front of patients about them when they're comatose. And by the same token, yes, I think your point is well taken, that people are sometimes awake even though they appear to be in a deep coma. When this guy who's the director of a critical care unit said the last words you may hear are time of death, it's like people are maybe hearing this.
Yeah.
So I don't.
So even if
talk.
they don't wake up, at least you know what you said to them.
Exactly, but it's also on the positive side, very important to talk to people in a coma as if they were hearing you, and oftentimes family is usually the first people to notice this. The doctors show up for 5 minutes and walk in the room, still looks the same, what goes on? They say, no, her heart rate went up when I, was playing this music or when I said something to her. So I would encourage you to, do that for sure.
Is it possible for the brain to repair itself from severe or chronic neurological conditions, repair the neurons, transmitters, and what would you need to be able to do as a chronic patient?
Well, it used to be that if you had a stroke or significant brain injury in the past, we would say, a year and a half, after that, you're probably not going to get much better. But there is a, significant plasticity in the brain and the ability of neurons and circuits around the area of injury to be able to, bypass the damaged portion of the brain and to rehab the brain, essentially. We had a study we did a few years ago that was using people that had strokes up to 5 years in the past that were showing improvement with stimulation or implantation of some stem cells into this area. So I'd say more of that is going to happen in the future. Even though you're not destined to a life of severe neurologic injury anymore.
So in things of non-injury, such as maybe MS or Parkinson's, is there regeneration capabilities?
Yeah, there are stem cells that are created, iPSCs they're called, pluripotent stem cells from adult stem cell lines that are now being implanted for Parkinson's. They're studies, none of them have been proven yet, but they're being implanted for Parkinson's, in some cases, post-stroke patients. There's a technique for people who've had strokes now that we've been using now for a year or so. One of my colleagues is in charge of that, was here just before the talk, where they stimulate the vagus nerve in the neck during rehabilitation therapy. So someone will go in and work their arm and leg on the stroke side while they're having this vagal nerve being stimulated, which is doing something to recruit, new pathways to help that side move again. So yeah, there's all kinds of advances. It's a great time to be a neurosurgeon or neurologist.
Hi, I'm wondering if you have any books that you'd like to recommend on this topic.
Any what? Books?
Any books?
Well, the Dinesh D'Souza book, Life After Death, is a great one. I read that a little while ago. Von Lommel published a book too. I don't know. I've read mostly his papers, but the Dutch cardiologist Pim von Lommel also wrote a book. I don't know the exact name of it now, but if you Google his name, Pim, P-I-M, Van, V-A-N-L-O-M-M-E-L. If you just say Dutch cardiologist near-death experience, it'll come up. And then he, in turn, he has a number of interviews on YouTube that you can watch, and he quotes all of the books that he has read and delved into. It's interesting, he was an atheist when he started his medical career. Now he's a monist. I don't know if that's believes in the universality of the world and all living things. He's kind of inching his way perhaps toward Christianity, I don't know. But
we're responsible for the morality of our actions, but sometimes what you see is after a brain injury that can change in a person. How do we reconcile that with the soul and the things that we know?
I'm having trouble hearing you, sorry. What did you say?
We're responsible for our actions, the morality of our actions, and sometimes that changes in people after a brain injury.
Oh, yeah.
So how do we reconcile that with the idea of the soul within us and our responsibility for
that's
morality?
a good point. How is the soul, affected if the organ that is the voice of the soul, the brain or the mind or whatever, has been impaired? So, I got to think, and there's no priest here or somebody who has studied philosophy, that you're not morally responsible for, things that have. So my wife was a critical care nurse, and I remember when I was first dating her, we'd walk into a room in the ICU. I was a resident at the time, and some young guy who had a horrible head injury, is just cursing and telling her to do this or that, and I'm like, God, how can you, live with that? Come on. Oh, it's a brain injury. You can't be responsible for anything like that. You can't judge him on the basis of that. So your soul obviously is still there. It just can't express itself in those situations, and you wouldn't be morally culpable for bad decisions, I would think. Yes.
Hi, I've got a couple of things. One of them is just an anecdote, but the application of it may mean something. We took care of a patient in the hospital, and the patient died, but the patient was, I can't remember exactly, but an Eastern religion, I think Hindu. We couldn't move the body for hours and hours and hours, even though everybody was calling to use the bed and stuff, because there was an essence, apparently. I'm going to not phrase this correctly, but they were waiting for that essence to leave. After the patient had no pulse, you know what I mean? Like you had to leave them alone for, I think it was 6 hours in that hospital room. I don't know if that's feasible now with the bed turnover, but that was
difficult now.
But that was a deal. So that's one thought. And the other one was, what are your thoughts on, like, for example, hospice nurses taking care of their patients, they're in the process of dying, maybe a week before, often a week or two before they actually pass away. The literature shows that that's when dead relatives might come and visit them before, you always hear about it like, oh, at the moment of death, oh, I see angels and
Grandma,
Jesus is here.
to
And it's usually a week or two beforehand, and they're so sure of it. Do you have thoughts about that experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's all open. I would say we don't know. We do know that in some cases the brain continues to function after the heart has stopped beating. There are things that are going on now, though, to sort of answer your question, I would say yes, all of that has been reported and is potentially, a reality. This guy, von Lommel, who has seen hundreds and hundreds of these cases, he went from just a strictly scientific approach, a materialist, to he believes in the non-physical nature of the mind and the soul after hearing hundreds of stories just like that. But now, especially with what they just presented a few weeks ago, we have patients dying in some hospitals, and they're not brain dead. They've had irreversible injury to their brain. We can see it on the scans. There's no way, I can say from 40 years of experience that this person is ever going to make any kind of a functional recovery, go home, live with family, etc. And so then the family says, well, what can we do? Well, in the organ, people say, well, if you take them off the ventilator, they're going to breathe. There's still a reflex, so they're not dead. But they probably won't make it more than an hour or two. And so they take them off the ventilator. They watch the heart slowly stop beating. His heart stops. They wait 4 minutes, 5 minutes, I don't know exactly what it is, and they say, okay, go. They start the heart, clamp the carotids, okay, so no blood can get into the brain. And we just heard evidence that, some people are alive, at least conscious, maybe for minutes, if not hours after the brain. Clamp the carotid so no blood gets to the brain, and then take them down and harvest the organ. So it's a slippery slope.
Can give them a little morphine extra to encourage it.
Is there any research on similarities with brain activity in the unborn or immediately after birth and then death?
Boy, that's a good question. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know about that. But I would think if it's after significant maturity of the nervous system, that there would be ongoing, neural activity after an abortion, for instance, a therapeutic abortion. Yeah. It's really hard to hear. Here, yeah. So that there might be, I think the question was, is there any research into the activity of the brain of an unborn child who undergoes a therapeutic abortion, and how long, they might feel pain, or that there might be brain activity, and I don't know. I would think that if the brain is of a certain age, that there would be neural activity that goes on for a little while.
Any of these medications like Prevligent, are they still any good?
I have no idea. Can't comment on that. There's certainly a lot of advertising for it, but
Or is that a placebo?
yeah, good question. I don't know. I don't know of any hard scientific evidence that it does a lot of good, but I haven't researched it.
Doctor, it seems that the majority of the cases presented stem from lack of flow of blood to the brain. Is that correct?
So no, I would say the Professor von Lommel says that most of these people had no flow to their brain. That's right, or poor flow to the brain. But the question is the poor flow to the brain causing you could make the case that the bright light, some of those things, the hallucinations might be due to low blood flow in the brain. But when they have veridical experiences, when they see things that are truly there, that happened during this event when no blood was getting to the brain, it's hard to fathom that they hallucinated a pen falling on the floor and rolling under a table when they have had no vision for their entire lives, or that they saw a shoe outside a room. Yes, it's contemporaneous with low blood flow to the brain, but causative, Dr. von Lommel would argue, not.
Could traumatic a concussion possibly stimulate that too?
Well, most concussions are not severe brain injury. So on the scale of brain injury, there's severe brain injury, which is you're in a coma and you're not waking up, and mild brain injury, which is you got your bell rung and you've concussed a little bit. So there's not as much brain injury in the concussion as there is in the severe brain injury. So you're awake. There's adequate blood flow to the brain, et cetera, in the normal concussion.
You mentioned Hemingway seeing the tunnel and the light. He wasn't injured in his head, was he?
Yes, he got shrapnel. I don't know if the shrapnel hit him in the head or if he was simply comatose from loss of blood. So I don't know that particular event.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for your comments and helping us understand. From your understanding and knowing the brain as well as you do, and being a Catholic, how will you answer, where's your soul? And understanding the demonic possessions as we do as Catholics, what do you think is going on there? Speculate for us, because you know the brain so well.
Yeah, so I think the soul, when Aristotle talks about souls, he's vegetative and animal souls, and the human soul, it's the vivifying or the life-giving essence, really. So I think our soul finds its expression in the brain. Does it? I would probably be heretical, or some theologian would say I'm spouting heresy if I said the soul is in the brain. The soul's in the body. It's in the whole body, but it expresses itself through the brain and above the brain, and again, through these things that Penfield showed, and that, oh, you're making my arm move. How did you know I made your arm move and that you didn't do it? Because there's somebody above the computer, the soul.
In your research of near-death experiences, what percentage did you find were negative, where it wasn't positive, instead it was demonic?
Yeah, so again, just looking at all the cases out there, there's very few of them that are negative. There are those who come back and say that they went to a place where they heard that there were going to be, if you did bad things, you were going to be judged on it. But most of them are profoundly positive, and von Lommel goes through that. Most people are sad that they've come back. They didn't want to wake up again. Oh crap! I'm alive again. I wanted to stay where I was. And to listen to this guy talk, and I would encourage you to find some YouTube videos of him and just listen to it and just hear. There are a number of skeptics who have written against him and say, well, he didn't rule out this, he didn't rule out that, etc. But this guy's got hundreds of these cases and people that have come to him, and you just can't. A guy with that much experience seeing this, you just can't write him off easily. And he says that these people come back and none of them are afraid to die. From that point on, they'll face anything, not afraid to die, and that they have these. Now, this is a little. I haven't seen a lot of this evidence, but I think he's written about it in his book. These people that can somehow see future events, like my uncle's going to die in a week or something. They have professed these premonitions that seem to come true. He writes about a lot of that. So, yeah, not much negativity. Okay.
All right. I think that's it. Yeah, Doctor, thank you for everything. Thank you, everyone, for coming out, and have a good night.
I'm Steve Selvig. We talked in December, right before I had surgery.
Oh, my gosh.
That's
Went great, I take it, yeah?
Grade
Oop,
1.
I'm going to take this off here.
Yeah.
Turn it off. Oh, that's awesome. Grade
This
1.
was a grade 1 HV. So it's aggressive benign. So we're going to do some radiation, that type of thing.
Sure.
But he thought he left some of the tumor behind, but we did a post-surgery MRI.
Couldn't see
It was
it.
clean.
Yeah, that's great.
It was clean. So, but I just
Oh,
wanted to
good
thank you
deal.
again for
That's